Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours for September 2024. I'm Karl Sakas, Agency Advisor, sharing advice to help you run your agency more smoothly, helping owners work less and earn more, and rewarding your best team members. Here's a preview of what we'll be covering in this month's segment. First, we have a fireside chat with our special guest, Khaleelah Jones, to discuss life after agency ownership based on her experience as a twice exited owner. If you've been thinking of selling your agency someday or you're actively working to sell it, we're going to have a great conversation. And if you're joining us live, feel free to share questions in chat during the fireside chat. Glad to relay things to Khaleelah. Then we'll look at how to prepare yourself and your agency for an exit, whenever that might be, including a way to save some money on my upcoming Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit workshop coming up soon, either live or you can join on demand. Then Courtney in Tennessee has a question about scaling. Specifically, what are some common mistakes that agencies make as they scale so that, well, you can avoid making those mistakes? Finally, Elise in Arizona has a question related to proposals and dealing with prospective clients, things around, is it ever okay to give a discount? And what do you do if not just a client ghosts you, but they use the proposal against you to try to get lower prices from other agencies? I have some tips on what to do if that happens to you or to prevent that in the first place. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer at a future office hours, please include it when you RSVP. We're taking bookings through the end of the year, meeting every second Tuesday in this time slot. And of course, if you're watching the video, you're welcome to submit a question for a future live event as well. All right. Well, first up, we have our fireside chat. Khaleelah, let me go ahead and bring you on Spotlight. Here we go. All right. Well, Khaleelah, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Thank you very much for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Well, in our conversation, we're working together coming up soon on the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit workshop. You are one of our expert panelists from your experience as an agency seller. And, we were talking about it would be good to talk further about it, to give people a preview of what to expect and of course, get to know you a bit better. And here's some perspective about what life is like after owning an agency. Since, when you own a business, I was thinking of owning my business, it becomes a huge part of your identity.
Everything. Yes.
And so on one hand, you want to have a sense of identity. On the other hand, you want to sell the business. So, how do you balance that? Maybe first, if you could introduce yourself and then we'll dig in.
Yeah, sounds good. So hello, everyone. My name is Khaleelah. As Carl said, I am a twice exited founder. The first time I sold my company, an agency that we also had developed a tool that automated the creation of social media marketing assets kind of right before AI became really big. So I guess the timing there was fortuitous, good in some ways, bad in other ways, getting people to understand the proposition. I also was the co-CEO of Ada's List, which I sold to Tech Ladies in 2023. So been around the block a couple of times. Before that, I worked in various marketing roles at growth stage and scaling companies, mostly in the startup space. And now I work in corporate venture. So a little bit of a change, but I do lead growth in corporate venture, so mostly go-to-market marketing kind of stuff. Really excited to be here today. And just as an aside, Carl and I go way back because we went to the same college. So that's how we got connected. So happy to see another William and Mary face here.
Yay.
Yay, go Tribe.
Yes. So, looking back to before you sold, what was your day-to-day like in running the agency?
I get asked this question a lot. And the issue and one of the reasons why I decided to sell was that it wasn't really like I had a day-to-day. It was very much that it could be high level kind of strategic working on the business, but to be quite honest, and I think this is how actually I came across your company in the first place. A lot of what I was doing was working in the business. I was still very involved in certain strategically important clients as well. So it definitely was a bit of a stretch and a struggle to try and grow the business, but also I was being pulled into client things quite often.
Got it. So thinking of my work less, earn more model, it sounds like you were often in stage one where you were
Yes,
mandatory, maybe sometimes stage two where you were necessary.
yes,
The ideal is to get to stage three where you're needed but
yeah,
not necessary, or
yeah,
ideally optional. Now, I mean, of course, you've become optional now at this point because you're out
not
of
involved, yeah, in the
out of
business.
the business. But
Yeah.
how did you know that it was time to exit?
So I actually got a letter in the mail. So I live in London. I think that's important to preface this. So things are still done by the mail a little bit more here. But I got a letter in the mail from a broker who was looking for a client, actually, who was a larger agency and wanted to acquire a smaller agency. I didn't end up selling to that client, but it actually got me thinking about, well, one day by hook or by crook, maybe I'm going to be too old to run a business, or maybe I want to exit before that, but I should probably have some kind of plan in place. So that's actually what got us started on developing that technical tool that I mentioned, which kind of
Mm,
underlined the valuation of our agency. And it also started us on a kind of journey of how to get me out of the day to day to make it a sellable asset, essentially.
got
So that's kind of what kicked that off, but it actually led to a couple-year project to be able to get to that place.
and I mean to frame for you and for everyone else the idea of the first offer, the first interest not being a match, that is more common than not, right? So
Yeah.
you get the cold email or the cold letter in this case, but it sounds like it got you thinking, and also the fact that it took a couple years, that's not unusual, to like get things sorted and all.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
did you have anything on your list of what you needed to figure out but before you'd be ready?
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually took a conversation with that first broker, and then we actually got fairly down the road. And my intention at that time was
Mm,
actually not to sell, but it was to
okay.
get an understanding of what people would actually look for when they were buying an agency. So it was more of like my detective work of trying to kind of understand that. And then from there, I went and got advisors who could basically help me put those things into place. And the two things that kind of rose to the top was essentially you're a services-based business. So when you sell, you might get one, maybe 2x of your revenue as just
Mm,
a services business. So what else do you have? And that's why we started Dime, the technical tool. And then on the other side, it was you are your business, which you alluded to at the very beginning of this. So if we
yeah,
take you out, what is the business actually worth? And so what
right.
I ended up doing actually was buying a couple of very small consultancies and kind of training up the people in it to take over,
Mm.
so that I was no longer the business. And yes, that was a several year process actually.
Well, and I mean that actually went relatively fast. We'll talk about in the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit workshop about doing a roll up as a varsity level strategy of let's bring in other smaller businesses, smaller agencies to build a bigger business,
Mhm.
and also that it's hard work. So
Yeah,
congrats
it
on
really
getting
is.
that done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So okay, so you had gotten some interest, you used that to do some detective work, and then explored things further, identified that you wanted to build some intellectual property and also strengthen the team to make yourself more optional. Okay, so that makes sense. How you mentioned that initial letter wasn't the person who bought, but how did you connect with the final or the eventual, well, two buyers? But how did that come about?
So actually, it's really funny. The buyer of the agency. So I ended up actually splitting the kind of Dime and like the technical side, and then the
Yes.
agency services side into two separate businesses. So I guess you could say I've sold three businesses, but I'm counting Careful Feed Digital as kind of one. But
Yeah.
Careful Feed Digital, we actually were acquired by a client. So we did a lot of white label work for larger agencies, mostly content agencies where they needed to. I should have mentioned that my agency was a digital marketing agency. So
Yeah.
our specialties were really in technical SEO and then paid advertising. So we were often approached by content agencies, design agencies that didn't have the same specialties. So
Got
they
it.
actually wanted that specialty in-house. We'd worked together for a really long time. We were already pretty embedded. So that was funnily enough, just a conversation where I mentioned, hey, I'm kind of looking around, and they're like, we're kind of looking around to buy a company. And then the intellectual property, that was something that was kind of completely separate. We can go into that if you want, but since it's not part of the agency per
Mhm.
se, yeah, that it's just interesting that that was one of the pieces of feedback was to increase your valuation, you need to build this. And actually, that was not my experience at the end of the day, but it was still a very useful experience nonetheless.
That makes sense. So, to what extent did you have a plan for how you'd spend your time after the exit? Did you have a plan, or like how did that work?
So there's actually someone here on this call who was a client, and I think that I see her smiling. I thought that I could just immediately like step away, and she will be able to tell you that that is absolutely not the case.
Okay.
So in my case, basically there were revenue and profit targets that the business needed to meet for 2 years before I could actually be completely out of the business. And
Hmm.
then because of the strategic importance of some of our clients, actually, I just finished like working in the business earlier this year. I was just a contractor after that.
Got it.
So my initial kind of, oh, I'm going to go off and write a book and spend some time on the beach, I was able to do that, but we really had to start with me being kind of fully still in my CEO seat and then
Mhm.
starting to kind of step back little by little. That was mostly run by me and how comfortable I felt with being able to, again, meet those revenue and profit targets for me to get my
Right.
full payout. But
Yeah.
I think that that's something that people should really be realistic about because that was a big learning for me.
That's a
Yeah,
great point. And I mean, your experience not unusual, right? Of like having the earnout commitment
yeah,
rather than just walking away completely.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, people can walk away completely, but if you do that, you're not going to make as much money
Exactly,
from the deal.
exactly,
Which, I
exactly.
mean, consider if you're the acquirer, putting yourself in their shoes, you don't want to just hand, zillions of dollars to someone who then walks away and leaves you trying to figure out how to run the business. So, I mean, overall, it makes sense as a risk sharing mechanism,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
it does mean you're not just going to leave. And I saw a kind of a sad version of that recently here in North Carolina, where a staffing firm had been in business for 30 years, professional services like agencies, and the owners shut it down because they were profitable. They'd gotten best places to work awards, this and that. But the owners just were done. They had two kids. They were in their 20s. They didn't want to take over the business. And the CEO of the co-founders was like, I didn't want to stay for another couple of years for an earnout. And it's like, like if only he had started the preparing to sell
Yeah.
process several years ago. My estimate was in his case, he walked away from like $3 million.
Wow.
So
I mean, sometimes when you're done, I guess, and there's that
yeah,
burnout element to it. But I
yeah,
also think that something that I learned throughout the process was that I guess this was just, naive of me. I was like, oh, when someone buys your business, there's like a structure that you need to kind of stick with. And
uh-huh.
actually, it's negotiation.
Mhm.
So the big thing that I learned was I put everything on the table of here are my terms and what I would actually like.
Yeah,
But it's a conversation. So in my case, actually retaining, making sure that the people that I hired, the small businesses that I purchased to kind of bring Careful Feet Digital to where it is, that was very important. But everything is kind of on the table when you're having these conversations. So in this case, I'm just like, oh, that is a shame because they probably could have found an acquirer where they could have maybe made some kind of, everything is negotiable,
right.
basically.
Yes, yes. And I mean, also thinking, if you're going to have, say, one of your employees buy you out or a couple employees, I have several clients in that situation, and part of that
Mhm.
lead up is, okay, let them know you're interested in that so they can confirm if they're interested or not. Of
Mhm,
course, you have some other
mhm,
things to discuss. I would also say, like, ask them, what is their credit score? Because if they have a terrible credit score, they're going to have trouble getting financing to buy the agency.
mhm,
Had that
mhm.
recently where a client was like, I don't know. And he asked, it was like over an 800. I'm like, great, just make sure he doesn't go off and buy a boat or something like that. Although I don't think anyone should buy a boat. You want to know someone who owns a boat, but not be the boat owner
Be the
yourself.
boat owner.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's see. So, how have things turned out? Like, what are you working on now?
So one of the things that I'm really grateful for actually as well in that earnout period is, as I mentioned, I had all of these kinds of preconceived notions about what my day would look like, about what kind of life would be like after. But in that earnout period, I was really able to solidify by actually still working in the business to a degree, helping the business kind of grow to the next stage and having that kind of mental space that I did not have when I was day-to-day CEO in the business. I
Yes.
started realizing some of the things that I was actually good at, which marketing kind of goes unsaid at this stage, but then
Yeah.
also helping pretty early stage nascent ideas grow. So, and also I had obviously by this time had gone through the process of starting, scaling, selling a business. So I thought, maybe I'll look at venture. And so corporate venture very quickly became something that I kind of like honed in on. And so
Yeah.
now I'm working for International Airlines Group, which is one of the biggest airline groups in the world, for Avios, which is the travel currency that powers like British Airways, Iberia, their loyalty programs. And I'm basically helping kind of grow the valuation of the IAG brand by bringing net new businesses to market. So again, it was kind of taking the strands of what I had learned as an agency owner, but more in that exit phase, and then
Yes.
saying like, okay, here are the things I'm good at. I'm going to go and find a job in this area. And the reason that I felt that I actually wanted to find a job, because some people are like, why aren't you
Mhm.
retired drinking, a pina colada on the beach?
Yeah.
Um, is because I did have conversations around doing a little bit more early stage investing or advising. But as I had mentioned at the very beginning, my background has been more in startups. And then I started my own business. And
Yeah.
then I worked at Ada's List for a fairly early stage small company. So the thing that's missing is the corporate experience to really say, hey, I've like seen it all, and be able to have those advisory conversations with like a little bit later stage companies where
I,
there's a little bit more panache, I guess I will say, to the brand. And so this is it's very important for me, I think, to have this experience to kind of bring that full circle.
that makes sense. I've written about, I mean, a lot of agencies want to work with very early stage startups. It's dangerous, right? Because they're still trying to figure things out and you're sort of
Exactly.
along for the ride. So I wrote an article on why most agencies shouldn't work with startups, and the part two was you can't resist. Okay, here's how to approach it. But then, of course, enterprise is its own separate thing as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've shared some articles there. You had mentioned doing something of a career pivot. What would
Mhm.
be your advice to people who are thinking of maybe now is the time to make a change?
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much where I got to, somewhere
Okay.
in the, I would say negotiations of the sale, but even obviously before that, because I was like, okay, I no longer want to be a CEO. For me, it really came down to, well, what are the things that I'm good at? And then what are the things I'm good at that I enjoy? And I was surprised by the answer to that. So while I really
Ah,
enjoy marketing,
mhm.
day to day, I actually really enjoy more of the business strategy,
Got
financial
it.
planning, financial strategy. And so, again, that's why I was like, oh, I can take these experiences from marketing where I know what good looks like, and I can really bring that to the table in organizations that are looking for a more kind of like strategic lens of what that looks like. But I would say, like, starting there, and it really took
Mhm.
me, I would say, a couple of months to get to the bottom of like what am I good
Okay,
at, but what do I actually enjoy, and then how can
right.
I actually flip that around into another career. And that was actually just talking to people, because I think we get so lost in this is my identity, this is what I'm doing day to day, to actually
Right.
even know what else is out there.
Let's talk more about identity. So, I'm running my third business since high school. I've been running it for over a decade. My name is on the door, as it were, which I don't recommend, but kind of
Yeah.
thing. So how have you navigated the changes to your identity?
That was really, really hard for me. I mean, my business was my baby, and very my name was not on the business, but it might as well have been. I mean, I was definitely, I think, synonymous with Careful Feet Digital. So honestly, after I sold, I was not in a celebratory mood. I was not in a happy mood, and people were surprised by that. But for
Mm,
me, it almost felt more like a loss in a lot of
yeah.
ways because I put so much of my personal identity into the business. And I think that a big part of that is actually starting. I think I probably should have started to have more serious acquisition conversations sooner. So I would say,
Mhm.
like, if this is even something that is in the back of your mind, or you kind of have it in your business strategy or plan, like, I want to exit in 3, 5, 7 years or whatever,
Mhm.
start having those discussions and getting
Yeah.
feedback on how you need to kind of like pivot to do that. I guarantee you that a lot of the feedback will be, well, you can't be your business. So that starts you preparing for that like
Right.
very early on. And also, I think that that will help you. I know you're about to talk about scaling, but that will
Mm.
help you scale in ways that do not involve you, which will help increase the valuation of your business as
For
well.
for sure. I mean, my advice to clients is ultimately the more optional you can make yourself,
Yeah,
either the better a deal you'll get on a sale because you're able to step away and sooner, or if you lean toward running a lifestyle business, the more optional you are, you can focus on doing. You mentioned, talking about things you like doing or you're good at and all, but that you love doing. You can do the stuff you want to do rather than what you have to do to an extent.
exactly.
Um, as we're wrapping up our fireside chat, is there good and bad? What is it like to not be the boss of everything? It sounds like you sort of phased out as CEO during the earnout, so it wasn't going, it wasn't working 100 hours a week for
No.
2 years or what have you. But what is it like not being the boss of everything anymore?
Yeah, it's confronting. It's really hard, particularly when you're working in an organization where you used to be. So you used to be able to call all the shots. What worked really well for me was actually uncoupling my identity from the business, because a lot of times I would take it very personally if something was going well or if it wasn't, on like a more personal level. So once I was like,
Right.
well, this is not something that, is mine anymore in that way. I'm not saying I
Mhm.
didn't take ownership and responsibility, but there's a difference between that and taking it super personally. I was definitely, in a way, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I was
Mhm.
definitely able to take some distance. And I would say that that's all good. I actually wouldn't say that there's anything bad, because even the things that were a little bit challenging or confronting
Right.
were a lot of the things that I've been able to focus on this new step in my career
Yeah.
as venture builder. So all good stuff, I would say, for me.
Awesome. Well, if people would like to get in touch, what is the best way to reach you?
I am the only Khaleelah Jones on LinkedIn. So please, if you have
Hey,
any questions, then you can just look me up there.
awesome. And I know you're working on a new book, right? Good
I
luck
am.
as
A
you're
history
working
of
through.
women in the workplace, which is something I'm doing in my spare time, as it were. So yes, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I always post updates there.
Awesome. And we've shared a link for joining people joining live. We shared a link in chat. And but as you said, you're the only Khaleelah Jones on
Yeah,
LinkedIn, so
easy
easy
to find.
easy to find. Well, Khaleelah, thank you so much for joining. And of course, we'll
Thank
see
you.
you again soon in the
Yes,
Control and Maximize Regency Exit workshop.
wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care. Thanks. All right. Well, if you have any follow-up questions for Khaleelah, of course, you can reach out, or you can also ask her questions live during the workshop. Speaking of the workshop, well, coming up, by the way, we'll be answering a question about scaling. So if you're interested in scaling and growing your agency, stick around. We'll also take a look at dealing with discounts in sales and sketchy prospects. Not that you've ever run into a sketchy prospect, but hypothetically, if it ever happened, maybe some tips on what to do. But first, a word from our sponsor. This agency office hours is sponsored by Sakas and Company. I'm Karl Sakas. We have an event coming up that I think you might like if you are thinking of selling your agency, or you definitely want to sell your agency, or you might ever want to sell your agency rather than just shut it down at some point. you'll probably want to check out the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit Workshop. It's coming up live October 2nd, 9th, and 16th, 2024. And you can also join it on demand if you miss the live edition. And when you get your live ticket, it includes on-demand access as well. We'll be looking at how do you get the best possible deal when you sell your agency. Of course, best is going to be relative to each agency and each circumstance, but our goal is to help you get the best possible deal. We'll share tips, including on how to get an extra $1 million in your valuation, what that would take. And what started as a workshop has really turned into a mini conference. I'll be speaking. My co-organizer, Mike Belasco, who's an exited agency owner and past client, will be speaking. We have 9 speakers altogether. Khaleelah, whom you just heard, is one of our panelists. We have a panelist in session 2 from agency sellers sharing, oh, what would they have done differently, as well as agency buyers sharing what they're looking for. The lineup of speakers include Jonathan Baker, M&A advisor, Pradeep Nalluri, who until recently was the head of agency acquisitions for Andrew Wilkinson of Tiny, and one of the panelists is Hugh Boston, who is the head of M&A for Interpublic Group, where he bought agencies ranging from 2 million to 2 billion. And we have even more speakers, so too many to fit into this segment. So if you get your ticket now, you can get early bird pricing automatically. We've shared a link to the website, so you can check that out. Buy your ticket sooner than later to get the best possible deal. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to share in chat or reach out via the event website, and my team and I are glad to help. All right, well, next up, we have a question from Courtney about scaling. Courtney, if you want to come on video and unmute, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Welcome. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, indeed, all set.
Great, great. Yeah, thank you.
To paraphrase, your question is about scaling. Every agency wants to scale to some extent to grow more smoothly. And to paraphrase, you had asked, what common mistakes do agencies make as they scale, and how can we avoid them? So if you could elaborate on your question and introduce yourself, and we'll dig in.
Thank you so much for answering my question on your office hours. My name is Courtney Delora. I own a small little agency called Lot 25. It's in its infancy, and I've run agencies before. I was the president of an agency and have done a lot of work in-house as a vice president of marketing and enterprise. And I've stepped out on my own and have seen a lot of different mistakes made in agency world. And I would love to hear your take on what are some of the most common mistakes made when scaling from infancy with the goal of acquisition in, roughly 5 to 10 years.
Got it. So to recap, if you're looking to scale your agency, especially as an early stage agency, or potentially any stage, if you're looking to sell in 5 to 10 years, what should you be doing to avoid common mistakes? Well, let's dig in on that. And by the way, for anyone who's listening live, feel free to share in chat. What are your top tips as you have scaled your agency? What do you recommend for Courtney and for anyone else who's joining? So first, Courtney, it's really smart to be thinking about this now. You mentioned the idea of selling potentially in 5 to 10 years. I'm glad you're asking about this now rather than in 5 to 10 years. We shared the example where the business owner waited too long before selling. Instead they shut things down in 30 years. If they had started, say, 5 years earlier, they would have had more options. So just you're already doing the first step, which is to plan ahead. I would also, given your interest in exiting, I would also create an exit plan. We've shared an article about that in chat for live, and we can share a link to it as well for the recap video. But what is your exit plan? That doesn't mean you're necessarily going to follow the exact plan. My parents were both career Army officers. There's the joke, no plan survives contact with the enemy. But you need to make the plan to have things, to prepare, including to identify what you don't want. For instance, when it comes to growing, for some people, a well-sized agency would be 10 people. For others, it's 100. For others, they might want to grow to 1,000 people. I mean, that would be a pretty big agency. But what is your ideal maximum? Because overall, the bigger your agency, likely that's going to be higher revenue and likely higher overall profits. And so your EBITDA, your earnings are likely going to be higher, and potentially you could sell for a higher valuation. But if you're going to be miserable running a 100-person agency, don't grow that big, right? So I would start by identifying what is your ideal destination growth size. If knowing yourself, you're happy with 20 people, great, don't go beyond that. That will limit to an extent the exit size compared to a much larger agency, but that also means you're not going to be miserable for years while you're working to grow and all. And you want to be happy with the day-to-day of running the agency, regardless of how the exit goes. So, think about your exit plan, identify parameters for growth. That's an important starting point. When it comes to scaling, you also want to have systems in key areas. Some of those key areas include business development, team structure, delivery and services, hiring, and then also the bigger you get, internal reporting. So let's take a look at each of those. Business development for scale, that includes lead gen, it includes screening potential clients, and it also usually includes some degree of partnerships. So, when it comes to lead gen, a stronger sales pipeline, including a lead gen pipeline, tends to make everything easier. If you have more business coming in than you can serve, you're going to feel confident about the business. You're going to feel confident about hiring. You're going to feel confident about saying no to poor fit clients. We'll talk more about that in the next segment about dealing with sketchy prospective clients and all. But think about it. If you have room for one client and you've got just one inquiry, well, you're kind of take whatever's going to happen. If you've got two clients for one spot or three, now you can be picky. So having systems to work on biz dev is important. I found in the research that I did last year in conjunction with DataBox, agencies, even up to 50 plus people, the owner often is still the CMO for the agency self-marketing. So you're still probably going to be involved as CMO, but ideally you're delegating day to day. I'd mentioned screening, being picky about potential clients, ideally saying no to the poor fit clients, or if you do take them, like sometimes you need to take a poor fit client, make sure that you keep marketing and you keep selling rather than becoming overly dependent on that poor fit client. That's important. And then also think about partnerships. Who are agencies that provide complementary services, maybe for a similar market? I know, Khaleelah talked about that, about providing services to agencies where they didn't provide her agency services, so she could be there, whether as a white label partner or a strategic partner. That's helpful. Before we take a look at team structure, what's your reaction so far to what I've shared?
Yeah, very, very helpful, very much aligns. I love that. It was interesting because the question I had, and then all the things that you and Khaleelah just chatted about, it did make me feel good that I am already thinking about some of those things and already trying to identify how to untangle myself from the day to day. And the
Yes.
next phase of my scaling is to bring on talent to start serving the clients that I have a little bit more intimately. So yeah, it's just very, very much very aligned, very helpful information. Thank you so much, Carl.
Awesome. Well, let's take a look at team structure next. So, that includes likely adding layers. So startup agencies, it's very flat. Everyone is reporting to the boss, or even it's not always clear if there's a reporting relationship. It's sort of like everyone is in one room. You might be remote, but it's like everyone's just sort of there. And if you need to communicate, you just sort of turn and like, hey, we need such and such. Hopefully not yelling across the room, but that kind of version of it. So that's helpful. But if you want to scale, you'll have to add layers of management. There are some people who talk about the idea of holacracy, HOLACRACY, Cracy, where it's like, people just kind of manage themselves and they figure it out and all. And that is nice in theory. I don't see that working smoothly in most situations in most companies. Even when people mean well, they don't necessarily know where the business is going strategically. So you don't really want people rowing in all these different directions. So, structure, usually that'll include hiring a number two at some point. And we've shared an article in chat about ways to change how you structure your team over time. We also have an article on 5 major team structure options. There are a couple that tend to scale better over time. So it's worth taking a look at that article to start exploring what makes sense. And for some agencies, that also could include building a more contractor-based agency, where the primary employees are people doing account management, project management, certainly the business development efforts and operations, but you're not necessarily doing all the day-to-day fulfillment. So check out the article; it'll give you some ideas on that. What about delivery and services lineup? Well, that includes things like, do you want to productize your services or do you prefer custom services? There are pros and cons to both. Productized tends to be easier to sell, easier to deliver. You don't need quite as skilled a team to do things. On the other hand, productized prices tend to be somewhat lower than fully custom. On the other hand, on the fully custom side, I mean, often you can charge more, but scope creep can be a bigger problem because every deal is unique. You can't always predict the right scope in the first place. Scoping tends to be expensive. There are different pros and cons. We've shared an article on that to help you dig in there. Um, that also includes nailing down your project management system, your PM system. I've noticed that they've started marketing themselves as not project management systems, but work management systems. Whatever you're doing, you need something. Be careful about going to an all-in-one system that does everything. Project management, digital asset management, accounting, everything else, because you need to use it fully to get the full benefit. And you may be better off using a couple core tools and then linking them together. We are, of course, in better shape there than the past. Our colleague Diane was custom building agency management systems in the 1980s. So thankfully, you can get off-the-shelf software rather than having to do it yourself. Now, hiring. Um, you know, when you're growing, you're going to need to hire a lot of people. For instance, I have a client that has gone from about 25 people to 60 plus people in 2 years. That has required a lot of hiring. In their case, they've built out some new structures. They've recruited outside their core country, or they're already in the US and Canada, and they've started expanding in Europe and beyond. That may be something to explore. That can definitely require some trial and error. You may be outsourcing to another firm where you have one contact and they take it from there. You probably also want to build a pipeline of junior team members. That may not be as critical at the very startup stage, but sometime between now and the 5 to 10 years from now exit, ideally you're developing junior team members to step into increasingly senior roles rather than having to hire everyone senior in the first place. And that includes having a process, not just the pipeline, but having a process to coach and mentor people to get them from junior to mid to senior. At some point, you still will need to hire more senior people, but it's a lot better if you can develop people internally. The other thing that comes to mind is we could think of it as internal reporting. So as the agency grows and as you scale, you're going to be less connected day to day to everything that's happening. And that's a good thing overall, right? Because if you could be in everything at 5 people, you can't be in everything at 50 people. But that also means that things can go off the rails. And so you'll need to do some work to build out internal structures. For some agencies, that's things like an OKR, objectives and key results structure. They could be doing something like rocks within EOS, could be something else. The main thing is to have some sort of a common language for what you're talking about, and then some sort of a centralized location where everything lives, so that everyone is working on individual goals that importantly stem from higher level goals so that everyone's working in the same direction. And that usually includes things related to finances, goal completion, and other delegation. So, ultimately, Courtney, what's your reaction to all of that?
I think it's wonderful. I think it's a lot. It's a lot of great information. I'm so grateful for Kate, you on your team, sending all these articles over. I think they're going to be very, very valuable for those of us listening live to be able to read through those, but also for anybody watching this later. I think that there's a phase to all of this, and depending on size, I can understand where some of the systems, it's like a chicken and egg
Yes.
situation, but always good to put a system in place. Sometimes we can get, I think, as agency owners can get almost paralyzed, dependent on who you are and your personality type, can get a bit paralyzed in the setup and the process and the system. And it can stunt scale a little bit. So
Yes.
and that's where I can be, is I can be such an overly I'm a strategist by nature. And
Yeah.
so overly strategize, overly plan,
Yeah.
and the systems. I love that aspect of it. So yeah, very, very helpful. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thinking of a few more bits as we wrap up the segment,
Hmm.
um, do you currently have someone that you would identify as your number two?
Yes, I do. I do.
Excellent.
Hmm.
That's really helpful. I occasionally work with
Hmm.
agency owners where, they're growing and they don't have a reliable number two.
Yeah.
I have my Venn diagram. This is, if something isn't getting done,
Mm-hmm.
it's because you're missing one, two, or all three of those. And those three things, the overlapping circles, are desire, competence, and capacity. You need someone who has the desire to get
Mm-hmm.
things done as your number two, the competence to get it done. Of course, that'll evolve over time, and then also the capacity, the time to do it. Kind of thing.
Yes.
So that's great to hear that you have the person on board. As you grow, they may shift into a different role, right? They may not be in that
Mm-hmm.
role forever. But in my experience, good number twos will actually call out if they're in over their head. And or they'll try to figure it out first. But if they're in over their head,
Yes.
we may need some additional support here. So that's helpful.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh,
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, do you have any, before we wrap up, do you have any follow-up questions on what we discussed?
Yeah, a follow-up question I have when it comes to scaling and the mistakes that may be made is and you may speak about this in the next segment when you're talking about poor fitting or ill-fitting clients, is do you see that those agencies that as they scale, they really start to narrow focus and niche down, are acquired at a higher, or those that have a much broader service offering?
So, generally, specialization by industry niche
Mm-hmm.
tends to make everything easier. As I think about my clients who are generalists versus specialists, the specialists tend to have higher profit margins, they tend to be less stressed, and things just tend to run more smoothly. So, under the idea that a specialist agency can tend to charge premium pricing and thus
Mm-hmm.
generally get higher profit margins, it's probably going to sell for more because the EBITDA, the earnings before interest, taxes,
Yes.
depreciation, amortization, is likely to be higher. It will sell for more. The exception might be if you've overly niched in an industry that has minimal demand. There may not be an acquirer who's
Mm-hmm.
interested. But for anyone listening and it's like our niche is business to business, that's good, but I wouldn't call that a niche. That's still pretty broad. So I would say specialization does make sense. It's not 100% necessary, but it tends to make things a lot easier.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Courtney, thank you for joining. Let me know how things go.
Will do.
All
Will do.
right. Good luck. Well, our final section on Q&A today is a question, or actually a pair of questions from Elise in Arizona. Now, plan to join live? Some client stuff came up, so I will be answering the question in absentia. So here is the question in particular. Let's split it and we'll answer each of them. So first one is about discounting. Question about discounting. When should agencies consider offering a discount to clients? Well, I'm not opposed to discounts altogether. Sometimes a discount can make sense. The key is that if you're doing a discount, it needs to be strategically discounted rather than secretly discounted. What do I mean by that? Well, it comes from my concept of strategically free versus secretly free. If it's strategically free, you're telling the client that you're giving them a, a big discount for a reason that the agency benefits from, rather than the client demanding it themselves. For instance, a past client reached out asking a question about one of my articles, and I said, this gets into consulting. However, this would be a good update to the article. So I'm going to answer the question to help update the article, and the implication being he was going to get some free consulting advice. There we go. So that can be helpful. You can also do that when it comes to discounts, where you could say you're offering a new service. You might say, we're doing this for the first, we'll be honest, we're doing this for the first time. We have related experience, but this particular thing is new. And we're going to give you a temporary discount as we're exploring that, as a launch or a pilot or an inaugural client for this service. Maybe they're going to get it for free for a couple months. Maybe they're getting it at half off the future price. Either way, they know that they're getting a deal. And then at the end, they can decide if they want to keep paying the full price or not. It wasn't a secret. So that's important. Now, if a client requests a discount, what do you do if a client directly requests a discount? In that case, don't discount the full scope. Instead, look for ways to cut the scope so that they can pay less, but you're also doing less along the way. For instance, I had a potential client ask if I could give her a Louisiana discount. What is a Louisiana discount? I don't know. So I said, what do you mean? She said, well, it's just really hard to do business here in the state of Louisiana. I was hoping you could, help me out. Of course, I'm thinking, well, I mean, you're choosing to live in a state that you said is difficult to do business in. I'm not sure that's exactly my problem, but I offered her a narrower scope option rather than the broader scope that she needed but didn't want to pay for. And I offered her a narrower scope that still would have been profitable for me, still would have been helpful to her. Not as helpful as her paying full price for the full scope, but, potential benefit. She did not like that. She said, it's like you're trying to get me to give up my second-born child. Second-born child? I guess, is this the child she doesn't like as much? Or I'm not clear on that. But ultimately, I said, this is the offer, full scope, full price, or the narrower scope for the smaller price. There's also, of course, an implied third option, which is you don't want to pay for either of those. Okay, but I'm not going to do either of them. And that was ultimately what she chose. So maybe she found someone to give her a Louisiana discount. Yeah, so I mean, discounts are tough. The key is you don't want to discount the full scope. Or if you do, it's because you are volunteering it for a reason that the agency benefits from. And certainly they aren't going to last forever in terms of that discount. Now, the part two of the question was related to clients who ghost, but not just that, who ghost and backstab your agency. Here's the question. How do we stop clients who ghost us after they use our proposal to shop for lower prices? Ugh, that's not good. Now, more often, ghosting happens where clients get the proposal and you just never hear from them again. That's why you ideally want to either present your proposal where you're sharing it live and they get a copy afterwards, or you don't have to force it as a proposal, but you can say, all right, we'll get you the proposal by Friday, and then give you a couple days to review. We need to pre-schedule a Q&A call about the proposal. So you could say you'll have it by Friday. Would you like to meet on Wednesday or Thursday of the next week? Something like that. The key is they need to agree to a meeting to review the proposal, and you can answer questions rather than you just send it off into the ether and never hear from them again. And of course, if they refuse to schedule a meeting or you get the sense that they're being kind of squirrely about it, don't send them the proposal. It needs to be conditional. That's okay. But in this case, what Elise was mentioning was that she's had people take her proposal from her agency and shop it around to get a lower price. There are a lot of things going on there. One, if a client is doing that and they're actively trying to pit agencies against each other, they're not a good client. I think one of the broader questions is to consider of how do you screen out those sketchy prospects in the first place? There's the BANT, B-A-N-T model, or my Crux model for qualifying potential clients. X in my model is X factor. Like, how does the client make you feel? If you pick up that they're going to do some questionable things, think twice about continuing to engage with them. Or if you do, maybe if it's a case where you need the money, or maybe they seem okay otherwise and you're willing to give it a chance, ultimately think about how you can protect yourself. One option, of course, is to put a watermark over the proposal, noting that it's, private to such and such agency. You also could, and this is a little in your face, but if you find that all of your prospects seem to be doing the shopping around thing, I don't know, you could consider putting some sort of a message in the proposal and say, this proposal is confidential to blah, blah client name. If you're not at the client name and you're seeing this, this says something about their approach to confidentiality and business ethics. Now, I think that's a little in your face, and it's going to be a turnoff to clients that aren't trying to backstab you. But I don't know, something to consider. At a minimum, you could put the watermark on things. I think the broader question here, of course, is you want to build your lead gen pipeline. The stronger your lead gen pipeline, the less likely you are to, well, you still might need to deal with it, but you're not going to spend as much time on it. One thing you can do there is get the on-demand version of my Diversify Your Lead Gen workshop. Ran that live earlier this year, and you can now access it on demand, including advice on, well, how to improve your lead gen, getting better results in your existing efforts, and even some networking to find potential partners through the course platform, Teachable. Check it out. We shared a link for that in chat. That is available on demand. So as soon as you buy your ticket, you get instant access to all of the course material. So yeah, stronger lead gen pipeline tends to lift all ships. That tends to make it easier. And also if you're dealing with sketchy prospects like that, I'm sorry you're dealing with them. That is really frustrating, and it's no fun to deal with people that are just trying to take advantage of your agency. Well, that concludes agency office hours for September 2024. If you're joining us live, thank you. We'll get the write-up. Great comment. Brian, thanks for sharing. This is some language here to consider, by the way, if your proposal. Noting, this is the intellectual property of agency name is prepared for exclusive viewing by you and decision makers of your company. Requested you treat this information with the same care with which you handle your own proposals. Trade secrets is not to be shared with other firms without our express and written permission. Great language. And if another agency is reading it, they're going to be like, oh, if this client was going to do that to this other agency, what are they going to do to us? Brian, thank you for sharing the language on that. Well, we will be meeting again next in October for our next agency office hours. That's Tuesday, October 8th. If you are interested in joining the exit prep workshop, Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit, definitely get your ticket now, sooner than later, to get the lowest available price. It's currently on early bird pricing through September 30th. And you can get that discount automatically when you go to the site and sign up. And if you have questions that you'd like us to answer in a future event, include it when you RSVP. Kate or I will let you know beforehand if you're on the list. And yeah, in the meantime, running an agency will never be easy, but it doesn't have to be quite so hard. Follow the tips that we've shared here, and you can find elsewhere at the Sakes Company website, and things will be at least easier. So thank you everyone for joining, and good luck out there.